the development of the bullet was slow compared with the pace of improvement in the weapons that fired them.
The earliest projectiles would have been stones, rocks, something that was thrown by hand first. The caveman would have evolved from basically throwing stones to perhaps the atlatl, which was basically a spear projectile, eventually moving into projectiles that were used oftentimes on shafts, that is, as javelins, as arrows, as spears, and also as hand arms, darts.
Around the 9th century, the Chinese invented gunpowder. Firecrackers scared off demons. Simple rockets provided delightful spectacles and were also used as primitive weapons.
The Chinese soon learned that they could also project projectiles out of tubes. Some of the first firearms were nothing more than a bamboo tube with a polished rock and some gunpowder thrown in the bottom.
It took hundreds of years for the secret of gunpowder to make its way to Europe. It wasn't until the 13th century that Europeans began experimenting with it and its uses. Soon after, they were producing the first handguns and the world's first real bullet, the round lead ball.
The history of the round lead ball basically spans centuries. Part of the reason for that is the round projectiles would have been easier to load into the barrel than others. They're also possible to standardize in terms of weight.
Lead is a commonly occurring metal found around the world. Its low melting point makes casting lead balls an uncomplicated low-tech process. Using the simple lead ball, however, was complicated, slow, and unreliable. The gunner had to pour black powder into the smooth metal barrel and ram the ball into place. Next, he had to prime the flash pan with a small amount of powder. After all this, when he pulled the trigger, the gun didn't always fire, because the powder didn't always burn.
If it got wet, it was totally useless, and it was hard to keep it dry. Napoleonic-era armies rarely fought running battles in the rain.
Another even more serious problem was fouling. The buildup of residue in the smooth metal barrel, burning gunpowder, and lead from round balls left heavy layers in the barrel, quickly rendering the gun unusable.
And in a time of battle where you can be expected to fire 40, 50 rounds during a one day's engagement, after 10 rounds, your gun may become completely useless to you if you're not able to clean out that burned up fouling.
With nothing better to replace it, the round lead ball ruled for 5 centuries. Then, in the 1800s, over a period of less than 50 years, 4 separate discoveries would come together to create vastly more effective bullets. The power and amazing versatility of today's bullets depend on 4 key developments, all of them occurring in the 19th century. The rifled gun barrel, the conical bullet, the self-contained cartridge, and refined gunpowder. The first step in revolutionizing bullet design was the introduction of the rifled barrel. Rifling is the spiral grooved pattern cut into the inside wall of a gun barrel. As the bullet speeds along the barrel, the rifling sets it to spinning.
We believe that rifled arms, though, were initially considered for an entirely different reason than they're used today.
The initial reason for rifling was probably to control the buildup of powder and lead residue, which resulted in fouling the barrel. The grooves held some of the debris, leaving the barrel a little cleaner.
There was a theory that some gunsmith cut spiral grooves in a barrel just to counteract the effects of powder fouling, and found by accident that it made the bullet spin, the ball spin, and that it was far more accurate. Without a grooved barrel, without a rifled barrel, we would have no accuracy at all.
In fact, rifling had little effect on the buildup of residue. The spin, however, increased the accuracy of the ball, but only slightly, particularly when wrapped in a cloth patch. It would be another 200 years before the development of an entirely new kind of bullet, made truly effective use of rifling.
In the 1840s, a French ordnance officer named Claude Etienne Minet perfected a crude-looking bullet with a lead slug that had a hollow base. Because his bullet could be made undersized, it could be rammed down even a fouled barrel very quickly with no problems. But because the base was hollow, when the pressure of the expanding powder gas hit it, it would expand to take the rifling and spin accurately, and it was accurate even by today's standards. It was a huge, huge step forward.
You can think of it much as a quarterback throwing a pass. If he puts a nice spiral on it, the ball will go where he's intending it to go, and it will go a longer distance than if he somehow throws the ball where it's tumbling end over end.
Today we call it the mini ball. Little corruption of the French pronunciation, but a conical shaped bullet's going to fly through the air better than a round ball because a bullet is piercing the air instead of presenting a large face of resistance, so its friction is less.
By 1861, as America moved toward civil war, a deadly accurate long-range weapon with a fast-loading bullet was in the hands of the infantry for the first time in history. Commanders failed to grasp the implications, with catastrophic results.
The generals on both sides were indoctrinated with the tactics of Napoleon. Now, what Napoleon said you must do is line up all your troops in a row, cheek by jowl, and have them march in order toward the enemy, drums and bugles blaring, fire one volley, then fix your bayonets and charge.
That dissolved very quickly when you can sit back behind a stone wall and shoot at somebody 500 yards away and knock them down. And they won't even hear the shot fired at them before the round hits them.
Casualties on both sides were enormous because of the rifled barrel and the mini-ball. Perhaps the single worst slaughter occurred on July the 3rd, 1863, just outside a village called Gettysburg. In an assault led by General George Pickett, 13,500 Confederates marched in textbook formation directly into the blazing guns of entrenched Union forces. In about an hour, 10,000 Confederates were killed, wounded, or captured. The mini-ball fired from a rifled barrel helped destroy the Confederate wave, and arguably helped save the Union. Shortly before the rifled gun and the mini-ball proved their combined value, gun makers including Samuel Colt developed fixed ammunition for pistols, another of the four key developments. The first metallic cartridge was the pinfire, invented in France in 1828. A brass tube ran through the side to a percussion cap, which ignited when hit by the hammer of a pinfire revolver.
The invention of the metallic cartridge, in this country we have the partnership of Smith & Wesson to thank. I call it the 3 Ps, the primer, the propellant, the projectile, all in one. The 3 basic elements that you need to make a gun go bang and work are all self-contained.
At first, self-contained ammunition was slow to catch on. The weapons firing them were too few and too costly. But as weapons became available, metallic cartridges modernized the world of bullets.
The impact of cartridge firing guns really came after the Civil War with the appearance of firearms like the Colt Peacemaker and the Winchester Model 73. These were truly modern firearms. Reliable, simple, fast-firing, and accurate. That's when it came in, from about 1873 onward.
In the late 1800s came the fourth and last innovation, leading to the creation of modern bullets.
The most important invention in the history of the bullet would have to be smokeless powder. Without smokeless powder, we would have nowhere near the velocity we have today. We would have nowhere near the rapid fire potential. Everything would be different.
Smokeless powder was more stable and predictable than black powder, and far more powerful.
The first smokeless propellants of the 1880s were chemically very similar to what we have today, being primarily nitrocellulose compounds, a mixture of cellulose, nitroglycerin, and certain nitrates that made it possible to come up with smaller, elongated, jacketed bullets driven at very high velocity.
A mini ball could be fired at maybe 1,200 feet per second with black powder. With smokeless powder, you could get a smaller slug moving at literally twice that velocity.
The combination of the rifled barrel, the conical projectile, smokeless powder, and self-contained ammunition gave bullets unprecedented accuracy and power. The bullet continued to change to meet new demands. Late in the 19th century, Hiram Maxim's rapid-firing belt-fed machine gun worked best with a bullet tailored for it, pointed and more slender.
Now we can fire guns at rates of 600 and 800 rounds a minute, where before in the Civil War it was 3 rounds a minute.
The murderous efficiency of the machine gun and the new bullet was proven on the battlefields of World War I. In a deadly escalation, the British developed the tank to protect their troops from machine gun fire. To defeat the tank, the Germans created the first armor-piercing bullet. The German J round, a 13mm or 50 caliber armor-piercing bullet, gave them a chance against behemoths of steel.
You could have 2 men armed with this gigantic rifle firing armor-piercing rounds at British tanks and put them right out of commission fairly quickly.
The armor-piercing rounds were created by inserting a solid core of steel into the center of conventional bullets to keep them from crumpling when they hit a tank. In a later development, this core was reinforced with a nickel-cadmium plating. Even the most devastating bullets are useless if they don't hit their target. To help gunners see where their rounds were going, Army ordnance officers looked back in history to the Civil War for answers.
Being able to visually identify where your projectile is in flight easily have developed from lubricant used on various projectiles of the black powder age. Sometimes they would leave a little smoke trail as the bullets went downrange.
Smokeless powder had eliminated the trail, so the tracer bullet was created by attaching a pellet made of magnesium and phosphate to the base of an ordinary bullet. When the bullet is fired, it is clearly visible. Usually every 5th round is a tracer. Military bullets have undergone numerous refinements over the years, but their basic design has remained much the same since World War I. Lead cores wrapped with copper, known as the full metal jacket.